Welcome to Detoxicity, a podcast that aims to reframe the narrative around masculinity by way of sharing experiences and stories. If you're looking for one of those alpha male podcasts that isn't centered around things like inclusivity and vulnerability, you are in the wrong place. Or maybe you're in the right place if you recognize that the Joe Rogans and the Red Pills of the world shouldn't be the norm. Anyway, I'm Mike Joseph, I host and produce this show, and I'm happy you're here. We are closing in on 5 years of this podcast, and I appreciate all the support I've received and would love to thank everyone who's been a guest now and in the future for allowing yourselves this space to share your story. If you'd like to know more about the guests, I suggest following them on social media. I usually mention where you can find them at the end of each episode. You can follow me on Instagram at DetoxPod. You can request a free coaching consultation from me at mike-joseph.com. And you can support Detoxicity by spreading the word to friends, by liking and commenting on whatever platform you're using to listen, or by becoming a patron. Go to patreon.com/detoxicitypod and subscribe for as little as $3 a month, and you will get early access to episodes. I'll even send you a cool DetoxPod fridge magnet. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this latest episode. It's interesting to me that this podcast provides a forum to dig deeper into relationships with people that I even know relatively well. I'd consider this episode's guest, Tristan More, a good friend. We've spent a lot of time together over the past 10 years or so. We've traveled together. Hell, even the fact that this conversation took place with both of us on my couch, as opposed to over Zoom or some other teleconferencing software, speaks to the relationship that he and I have. And while we've touched on many of the topics this conversation covers over the years on a personal level, I got some new insight on the changes he's undergone as a person since our first meeting. Tristan and I talk a lot about religion, more specifically the evolution of his relationship with the church. And while this conversation was recorded before November 5th, I think it speaks to a lot of struggles that may have come to light for some folks in these days post-election. We also talk a lot about grief and loss, the struggle to make a career for yourself that fits your personal needs, the evolution of friendship, the evolution of our friendship, and much, much more. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Without any further ado, here's Tristan.
Hi, I'm Tristan More. I'd like to think of myself as a filmmaker from New Jersey. Currently, I'm a camera operator for sports, primarily at Princeton University. But I'm also a good friend of yours. And
yes!
I know a lot of people in the music industry and film industry just living life and learning all the aspects of both. What else do people usually say about
People
themselves?
say whatever. It can be as short or as long-winded as you want it to be. I do think that an interesting wrinkle to me talking to you for the podcast is the fact that we've known each other for a long time. Or longer than I have known most of the people that I have interviewed.
It's at least a decade.
It's more than, certainly more than 10 years. And I met you through your friend, our friend, Mike Duquette, who has been on the show before. So go back and listen to his episode if you want. And I'm trying to think.
The day we met was, I don't remember if it was actually Mike's birthday, but he had wanted to see E.T. in theaters.
Yes.
And it was playing at the AMC, I think on 34th, or around that area, wherever that AMC is. And a bunch of us came in from South Plainfield, New Jersey, which is where Mike and I grew up. And you had been down from Boston visiting. And you two had been friends for a couple of years through music. Had you both worked for...
We were both... Mike and I met through Pop Dose.
Okay.
Basically.
I had forgotten the specifics, but I knew it was through music.
Yeah.
And he wanted us all to meet his good friend who was coming by to eat dinner with us, and then we all went in to see the movie.
Right.
But then you moved back down, and when you came back down, you remembered all of us and invited anyone who wanted to come to the housewarming to stop by.
And you
And I
showed
love
up.
coming into Brooklyn. So a lot of my friends in the film industry and music industry live in this area or a little north. I've stayed in New Jersey this whole time, though. I went to school in Pennsylvania a little bit, and I thought about, after school, moving out to California and getting into the film industry there. I know a lot of people talk about their jobs, so that's, I guess, where I wanted to go with my intro. But I thought about what would be better, New York or California. And a lot of my family lives on the East Coast, and so I didn't like the idea of going to California and totally cutting them off at 22. So I thought, maybe I'll stick around here, see what there is in the film industry in New York. And the first film I worked on, which took about 6 months to get to, the directors were from California.
Okay.
So just the lesson from them was, you can do anything wherever you are. The film industry in Atlanta was starting to open up, and Walking Dead would become a big thing a few years later. And I just knew, okay, if I get a job in California, I know you can sublet an apartment for a few months and live there for the film shoot. So that was always my plan. And then suddenly, 15 years later, I was still in New Jersey. I don't think that's a regret at all. I love California, and the first time I ever went was actually with you.
Oh yeah, that trip to LA, that was fun.
It was a very quick weekend where it was New Year's Eve.
It was New Year's
back.
weekend, yeah. Got to go out to the West Coast in the middle of winter in New York. I'd only been to LA like twice before.
Oh,
maybe.
really?
Yeah.
You've been a lot since. When we went, I was like, where should we go? You know where
I
you're
had
going.
no fucking idea.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
So you had never been to Griffith Park then?
I'd definitely never been to Griffith Park. Yeah.
Our hotel was pretty close to Griffith Park, so I thought it would be a good idea to go up there.
Yeah,
and
it was fun.
And you said you hadn't been there, I think. It was a really good trip. I had a lot of fun, even though it was basically 72
like 72 hours. Yeah.
We got some of the best tacos I've ever had. We went to the
Grammy Museum.
Yeah.
So we've known each other now 11, 12 years, something like that.
Yeah, I think it was definitely 2013 would have been when that... Well, it might have been 2012 because that would be an anniversary for ET. That would make sense.
Yeah,
when
because
did
it was the
move back to
30th.
New
It
York?
was the 30th anniversary of ET.
Okay.
So it was 2012.
And when did you move back?
2015.
Yeah,
Yep.
so it had been a year or two in between, but you had talked to me a little bit because of your blog. I was going to say, I had the choice to go between California and New York, and getting to go with you to California. I got to see it, and I know it's beautiful, and I don't have any regrets about living out here because I see my family a lot.
Right.
And I kept the friends that I made in high school, like Mike Duquette,
Right.
and see them as often as I can.
There's something unique about, like, I'm thinking about the fact that you're still friends with so many people that you went to school with and you grew up with, and I'm friends with, like, nobody that I went to school with.
Then when did you leave? I know you've traveled around a lot.
I mean, I didn't leave New York City entirely until I moved to Boston, which was 2008. Okay. At which point, I'd already been out of high school for 15 years.
Right, I thought there was a little bit in between where you'd been somewhere else for an extended period.
I think it's more like a city thing than a me location thing.
Yeah, we're in a suburb in South Plainfield.
Right.
So...
And I feel like a lot of people don't go anywhere.
Right. I am fairly close to where my parents lived.
Right.
Or live still. But I've mostly stayed there because it's in between Philadelphia and New York where I get work.
Right.
So it's not necessarily because I didn't leave my town. I moved out of my town 7 years ago because I got an apartment.
Right. I mean,
but I could have moved into New York. I would have lost a lot of the work that I'd get in Philly.
Right. But you're still like a stone's throw from where you grew up. And your dad is still there.
Right.
And I think that's a much different... Again, like I'm thinking of my high school experience. And my graduating class was probably significantly larger than yours.
Mm-hmm.
But because of... the fact that my high school took people from all neighborhoods around New York City, so there was never like a home base where a plurality of people were. And the fact that New York City is transitory kind of place.
It's sort of what I wanted, too. I wanted to be able to be here and make new friends and lose new friends and also still have those old friends from South Plainfield.
Right.
They could come visit me. We do that with Mike because he lives in Queens.
Queens, right. Yeah, it's an interesting difference, I think.
I wanted both.
Right. Having a city experience where people just kind of like scatter. And then having like a suburban or rural experience where you go to elementary school together, you go to junior high school together, you go to high school together. If you go to college, you go to college together. You don't really leave that space.
It's funny, though. I've been going through a lot of my old papers. I'd kept them after school just because I wanted to look at them one last time someday. And that day was this past month or so.
Okay.
I remember everything that I did in school. I'll look at it and be like, I remember that terrible math assignment. I remember this fun art project, but I wouldn't have been able to recall it offhand. So I wanted one last chance. I've taken a picture of all my favorite things I did, like accomplishments or whatever, and I've discarded as much as possible to get it out of my parents' house.
Okay.
But I see a lot of lists of names or people I did projects with, and I'm not friends with them anymore.
Right.
Mike is a year younger than me. I often became friends with people that were the next year. So my three best friends are either 1 or 2 years younger than me.
Why is that?
I don't know. You know what it is? Mike and I met through chorus in school. And in chorus, you have all grades. So,
It's the shared interest.
and then our shared interest of chorus brought Mike and I together better, and then we were definitely seeing each other over our houses. With it, we would then play video games or watch movies or do other things. I think that's the key. The friends that I had in elementary school, we all played soccer together. I stopped playing soccer and started doing chorus, and that shift came to my friends were in chorus. So I think that's all it is.
That makes sense.
And that's where it allows you to find people of other ages.
That makes sense. That totally
or at least
makes
other grades. And the same thing happened in college. I was friends much easier because everyone was new.
Right.
But I found it to be the same where I would make friends with people the year younger than me or the year older than me. And I could jump from group to group and have a different thing to do that night.
Right.
Some people liked parties where you dance or drink or whatever. Some people liked watching movies. Some people just like getting stoned or going to watch a sports game or something. I had a bunch of different things I could do, and I had a person for each.
A diversity of friends. I like that. That is something like I aspire to. And, we've had these conversations about relying on one person for everything you need in life. And it's like, oh, but what if I do want a sports friend and a music friend and a go to shows friend and a go to the beach friend. Yeah. Expecting all of that to come out of one person, I think, is illogical. So, I don't know. But my original question, I was going to ask you to think back to 2012, Tristan, when you and I met. And here we are 12 years later, and both of us, I think, have changed in a lot of ways. I've seen you turn into not a different person, but certainly a more mature, more open-minded, more worldly person. And I think some of that is just like you get older and you learn shit.
Yeah, there's maturing naturally.
Right. But also, I think that the people that you have around you, because that dynamic has changed, you've opened yourself up to a bigger diversity of thought than you had when you and I first met.
Well, you're a big proponent of that, and you've been telling me that since we first met. Not that I thought I had a bad group of friends or anything, but
I don't think you have a bad group of friends, even though obviously there are some of your friends that we're not aligned in thought.
Certainly around 2016, I cut a lot of people out of social media that I wasn't interested in hearing from anymore. But I realized a year or two ago, I just don't have a social media presence anymore.
There's nothing wrong with that.
I use Twitter to look at news a little bit. I like Instagram because then people show their vacations. And I get to see what people are up to that I don't talk to as much anymore. I like knowing what other people are up to, but I don't.
But you don't want anybody knowing what you're doing.
It's not that I don't want people to know what I'm up to. I think people, and I am using myself as this example, I get in my own head about what I want people to see of me. Like, I went on a trip to Disney World with a couple of friends that I've made in the past few years, this past January, and I just posted my pictures to our Discord. And I realized as I was giving those pictures, I was taking a lot of things that were around the parks, whereas they were taking the selfies in the group shots.
Sure.
So they were already in the Discord, so I don't think I'm out of hand with that. But I delay myself and think, what will they want to see? I have to go through my camera roll, but I'd rather be in the moment with those people while I'm there.
Right.
So they're all posting when we get back to our rooms. We were on one of those resort campuses. And
I have had that experience.
They remember to do it before they fall asleep.
Right.
I go right to sleep.
Right.
Or I'm reading a book or something.
There's nothing wrong with your... Like, that's how normal people think.
Right.
It's about, let me enjoy this moment and then go back and process the moment, as opposed to let me go back and share this moment with everybody I know. There's something to be said for enjoying the experience as it's happening and not
curating.
Yeah, curating or turning the experience into something that you need to show other people.
Right.
You're enjoying that moment as the moment.
I do know a lot of the people that like my photos are often extended family, like second cousins that are in the Midwest, or friends from college that we like each other's photos.
Right.
that's the extent of our friendship at this point. So it's kind of like we get to know that we're
Something
alive.
for everybody, right? Yeah, it's a check-in.
Yeah.
But again, going back to my original question, is like, how do you think you've changed in like the 12 years since you and I met?
Well, I was going to bring something up. I'll bring it up after I think about in what ways I have changed. You say I have a more diverse outlook on life. I think I've tried to take in what's happened in society and reflect that back to other people. I don't think I was as outspoken about things that are wrong with the way our country's run, and so I will not hold back anymore. When someone says something
Stupid,
racist,
ignorant,
whatever, yeah. Ignorance, the word I was looking for,
Yeah.
but that's a nice way of saying it. Like, if you're being an asshole, stop being an asshole. And I will not be afraid to call you out on it. It's easier to do when you're maybe coworkers, but sometimes it isn't.
I wonder about that. Is
Maybe you're all good friends too. That's the thing.
Right.
My coworkers I like, but we're not best friends.
right? It would be easier. Everybody's different. It would be easier for me to call out somebody that I know well versus somebody that I don't know at all.
Mm-hmm. I understand that. Yeah. So if I see someone on the street calling someone out or being racist to them, I probably would be too scared. I'm probably a bit of a coward still in that regard. But it depends on the size of the person. I'm not stronger.
There's so many
That's
factors.
the scenario we're trying to write up together is difficult to think about, I guess.
Yeah.
But I know that with at least friends that have said difficult things, I've been hard on them, I think. And as for worldly, I know I've traveled more. But I also think there had been a bit of a change because of the pandemic where I looked to what I want in life and knew that I didn't necessarily want a 9-to-5. I had gotten a job in 2018 at a company in Jersey City. They're a good company. I had worked in the film industry in almost every aspect, mostly in art department with props and set dressing and such, but I had never really worked as a grip or an electric, and that company sort of makes electrics out in the world. Like, you will learn your trade from them, or you will work for them for a few years, and if you like working in that aspect of the industry, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a certain aspect of rental houses that they can become dull, and for me, having come from an aspect of film that was not that rental house, and the dullness that comes from a 9-to-5 job, I realized that I did not want to be there anymore. And I went about it, I think, the right way, where I said, I'd like to be here for the rest of the year. And it became, let's have you come on 3 to 4 days a week for the rest of the year. You'll have more time to do other things. I've wanted to be a writer for years, and it gave me more time to write.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest stumbling block for this as well was that I, as I said at the beginning, am a camera operator at Princeton, and a lot of the games are on Friday nights. So I would find myself working Monday through Thursday 9 to 5, then having to get up early to get to work by 7 to get that same shift in for Friday, and then leave to go to Princeton from Jersey City in rush hour traffic, and then do a hockey game or a soccer game, and then getting out at 10 or 11 at night, and then having another gig at Princeton the next day or Sunday or both, and then starting again. So for October and November, I might work 7 days a week, and neither job cares about the other one necessarily.
Sure, of course not.
Like,
yeah.
They're not paying for that. So it's up to me to have that wherewithal to do a 15-hour day that neither of them asked for. So
right.
I realized that was exhausting me at 35, and you need to be aware of your body. And I think that's another thing that I've come up with over the last few years, being aware of what's going wrong with your body or what your body needs that you aren't giving it and didn't realize could make you stronger, etc.
Right.
I had several gigs early on working in film where I would be driving home late at night and be falling asleep on the highway. And I tell any prospective PA to know your awareness of sleep level. If you're finding that first day that you're falling asleep, Is it because you just did 3 straight films and you're exhausted? You need a break in between. I know not everyone has a cushion of money. I am very lucky in that aspect that I had my parents to support me if I was very low on income.
Right.
But it's better to take a week off than to die in a car crash. So
then you get a lot more than a week off.
Right. So I was driving home from one film and saw my exit, and then woke up and saw my exit up ahead. Or I took the exit and saw my exit again, and knew that was a bad film to be on anymore. Luckily, they fired me from that film because I don't think they could afford the amount of PAs they had.
That's so scary. And I think about how many people in America have multiple jobs, that
they travel very far for.
They travel far. They compromise their health, their safety, their well-being just to make money. And I think we all do that to some extent. I mean, anybody who is not a 1%er does that to some extent. I certainly do it.
Everyone compromises a little bit.
Yeah, but I think of people who have to chug coffee or chug energy drinks just to stay awake so they don't fall asleep behind the wheel.
Right. And when that stops becoming effective,
right,
you don't realize it.
Right. Like, people endanger themselves and endanger other people just because capitalism makes it so that you have to put yourself in these situations just to put food on the table, to feed yourself, feed your kids, feed whatever. It's so fucked up.
I've also learned that I have been railing against that in those same words for the past few years, and to learn the place to say it.
Okay.
Like, if you're just repeating it to your girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever,
you don't want to say it at work.
Yeah, that too. You also don't want to just yell into a wall, like if you're repeating it every day when you get home.
Right.
That can wear on a person. So I've learned to know where I should say things.
And is that like a maturing?
I think it's a maturing thing. It's an awareness.
Maturity. Yeah.
It's an awareness of my. I wouldn't say I'm a complainer, but I can ramble, and if I get on a topic I'm mad about, I will take too long on it. So I think that's what I've matured in. The brevity in our own thoughts.
Sure. You've also had personal stuff, like your mom passed away a few years ago, which I feel like for most people having a parent pass would be an experience that definitely makes you question a lot of things.
Sure.
And you and your mom were close.
Mm-hmm.
I've had the good fortune to meet your mom on a few occasions. So that had to have certainly messed around with your thought process a little bit.
Well, there were 2 things. I had a friend pass away, which I've talked to you at extensive length about when I was 23, and then she passed away when I was 33, 5 years ago. So it's... my look at grief has become an aspect of my life. I think I've known a lot of people in my life. If we were to go into every aspect of my life, you know where. But I've had friends that were older because I grew up in community theater. They just passed away of old age or unfortunate diseases. And so I found myself going to a lot of funerals before I ever went to a lot of weddings.
Yeesh, that's rough.
And realizing it later when my partner has been to 2 funerals, her grandparents. And I think she's been to more since. But she was comparing the amount I've been to her own and finding that I've been to an extraordinary amount for a person my age.
Right.
I think there's also, I'm at the right age for the opioid epidemic. So I know several people from my class or around our classes that have passed away.
Oh, wow.
They weren't close, but I did see my one friend James's name come up a couple times when I've been going through these papers, and he passed away about 6 years ago from opioids. That's just one more person that's on my mind.
Right.
But you're right. Losing a parent is definitely tough. I'm an only child.
So
that will affect someone, especially if you don't have a brother or sister to help you out with emotional stability or logistical stability, too. I was taking care of her a bit with my father.
Right.
She had diabetes, but she inevitably passed away from and I always forget the word, but it's not a heart attack. It's congestive heart failure.
Okay, yeah.
I just am bad with names, so if I stumble on anything,
that's fine.
So she passed away literally from congestive heart failure, which is also what her mother passed away from. So she had that in her history, so I probably will as well. Both of her parents had diabetes, and so did she, so I'll have to monitor that. That's another. I actually think she went on. I'm thinking of dialysis.
Right. Okay, dialysis is for kidney disease
Right.
or kidney failure.
Right.
Yeah.
But that was brought on by the diabetes.
Right. Yes.
And so she was going in for dialysis, and she had her first test, and 3 days later passed away.
Jesus.
So I think her body was done.
Right.
But she had hip issues and foot issues that had been brought on by diabetes as well. So
right.
we'd been bringing her to rehab or
physical therapy
to get her hip better, and she just wasn't really getting better. So with Dad at work, I'd bring her. Or if I had a gig, she wouldn't go.
Right.
Or Dad would have to take off work. So it does help when there's a fourth person or a fifth person to help with that.
So you were a caretaker.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. From maybe 16 through 18. A little bit.
Right.
But not a 24-hour caretaker.
It still takes a toll.
And she was fine at home. So even up until the end, she could take care of herself.
Right.
The kitchen was upstairs, so it was just easier for Dad to go make dinners for the two of them. But she could have if she really needed to. If she was alone, I obviously would have taken care of her twice as much.
Right.
But I think she would have been able to make herself meals up until the very end.
Right.
And it was really the taking her to places so she wouldn't have to drive. She even drove until maybe 4 months before. And it was mostly just because, okay, it's easier for Dad to drive.
Right.
So it wasn't sad in seeing her fall apart. It was more sad in that she never really was recovering from what she might have been able to recover from.
Okay.
But dealing with that, it's mostly because she was only 65. And so any age you think they're too young for that.
Yeah.
My cousin's grandfather on their other side just passed away at 96. And everyone's like, that's fine.
Yeah, at 90,
You did it.
You overachieved.
Yeah.
So if you made it to 96.
I had thought about 20 years ago, I would like my parents to make it to 70. And my father's 71.
Right.
So I'm happy with that. I would have liked Mom to make it to 70. So it would have been nice to have her have 5 more years. But then, the way COVID went, I would have been real mad at a lot of people.
Right.
I am real calm and do not need to go down that tangent about how people acted during the pandemic.
Right.
Because
yeah, I mean,
I almost am certain she would have passed away from COVID because someone would have done something stupid. And it might have been me. So, and I would have never gotten over it if it had been me.
I can't imagine anyone who, during that period of time, infected, obviously accidentally, hopefully obviously, accidentally infected someone that they know passed away.
Right.
That level of guilt, I don't think I would ever be able to get over. Like, my next door neighbor died, from...
I sort of remember that. Yeah.
Right, from COVID-19. And this was at the very, very beginning of the pandemic. This was maybe
we don't know what's going on.
Late March, early April 2020. And I felt guilty because I was like, I don't think I had COVID before COVID was a thing, but who knows? I remember seeing her in the hallway, and now in retrospect, the interactions we had were super, super brief, so there's no way that...
Right.
But you wonder about that stuff.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, so...
That actually made me feel more grateful about when she passed away, though.
Right.
Because having to deal with her still having the same kind of doctor's appointment she was going through,
Right.
maybe a year later. She passed away May 19th.
Right.
Just for clarity. But if we had to bring her to a doctor's office, I am almost certain someone there would have had it.
Right.
Just routinely going to
It's a law
find
of
out
averages.
why.
Yeah.
What's going on. We didn't know what to do. People would go to the hospital to find out. And the hospitals were overwhelmed.
Right.
So I am sure that she would have probably gotten it there.
Right. So I am realizing two things. One, your mom's service was the last funeral that I went to.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And your mom's service was the last time I was in a church.
Oh, okay.
I think. I mean...
Have you been in churches much, though?
Not since I was a kid.
Right.
Once I moved out of the house and sort of divorced myself from Catholicism, church became a very, very irregular thing. Right. So since, 1994,
right.
I've been in churches...
For funerals.
for funerals and weddings.
Right.
And there haven't been that many church weddings that I've been to.
Right.
I mean, certainly I've had tons of friends pass away since, not tons, but I would say at least a half dozen.
Mm-hmm.
But either it was during the pandemic, in which case there's no public funeral,
Right.
or they've been not close in proximity. So actually, that's not true.
Have another one?
My grandmother's, because my grandmother
right.
passed away after your mom
I
did.
remember that.
So yeah, it's still been 5 years.
Was that in a church, though?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So 2019, either way, was the last
Sure.
time that I was at a funeral service or at a church.
Was it a Southern Baptist church? Because that could be the
No.
qualifier.
We grew up Roman Catholic, so I'm pretty sure that my grandmother's service was in a Roman Catholic church.
That would make sense.
Right. I feel like I've maybe been in a Southern Baptist church twice or 3 times in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe with my mom and my stepdad I might have gone to a Southern Baptist church,
Mm-hmm.
but I would have been 10 years old, so I don't remember.
And once in the actual South, maybe?
Yeah, well, yes. When my stepdad's mother passed away, it was in Georgia, and I would
Probably.
imagine it was a Southern Baptist church.
Yeah, I don't know what the other predominant denominations are down in the South other than Southern Baptist.
Right.
I mean, Methodist happens everywhere, but
Yeah.
I don't keep track of those things.
Yeah.
So, that is another thing I have been thinking about, has probably changed over the last decade, especially in our friendship, that I chose during the pandemic to leave my church, that church that funeral was at. I grew up in this Southern Baptist church, and you may ask why. I remember you mentioning you're from New Jersey, Tristan.
Right. The why came up in my brain as you were talking. So, yes.
Why was I in a Southern Baptist church? Well, it's a very nice church, but it had been a lot of transplants from the FBI that had grown up in or lived in Arkansas, Georgia, Alabama. They had all been in the office in Newark for the FBI.
Oh.
And they wanted a Southern Baptist church, and they all knew each other, and they said, can we find someone that can lead the church? And they put an ad out and built a church. They held services in another church for a year or two while it was being built, and then got more congregation from actual local people. But they named it a Southern Baptist church because they wanted the same values that had been taught in the 60s to them as children.
Sure.
So, or 40s and 50s, because these people would be in their hundreds now, those people that founded the church. Some of them were still alive when I was young. There was one that came a year in, and she passed away, I think, either last year or in 2022.
Okay.
And not from COVID, which was, to me, nice.
Right.
But she was in her late 90s. So
Wow.
that's the thing. It was a lot of people from then, and I know the Southern Baptist doctrine has changed over the years, but for the better, I'm not sure. For the better, definitely not.
Right.
Was it good then? I don't know either.
Right.
Is what I mean. I grew up learning in Sunday school how to, this is something you and I have talked about a lot, having empathy for other people.
Sure.
Jesus has a verse that he says, be kind to others and look after others, always take other people in. I'm paraphrasing because I am bad at memorization.
I mean, a lot of us know objectively the tenets of the Bible.
Right. Yeah, essentially accept other people.
Yes.
And I had taken this to heart as a child because it was being taught in my Sunday school. And I also grew up simultaneously, I mentioned, at a community theater where there were a lot of LGBT people.
Right.
Some of whom went to churches that accepted them. So I never looked at it as something confusing. I thought, okay, everyone goes to church.
Yeah, it wasn't contradictory.
Yeah, it didn't break my brain in any way. I didn't think there was a reason to hate other people, which I think American evangelicalism has become a way to stop other people from living their lives. And there's a good book that I read recently about this journey that I've been on, which I'll extend what my journey has been exactly, but it's called the Evangelicals, or Evangelicals.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I was going to mess that
Yeah,
up.
it's all right. We got you.
By Sarah McCammon, whose name I remembered to pronounce correctly. She's a bit older than me, a few years, and she talked about her journey growing up in Missouri in a Baptist church. I think it might have been American Baptist, but that isn't necessarily relevant. All the people that are around our ages have had similar experiences where you're scared into knowing there's a hell, or you're not accepting of a certain type of person. And she is possibly still, but at least was during the 2016 election, a reporter for NPR. And she witnessed firsthand the turning on journalists, the acclamation of American evangelicalism as the platform for Republicans, especially Trump. And she was baffled looking at her friends and family totally accepting this person who was totally contradictory to what she had grown up learning. I grew up watching stuff like Home Alone 2 or Trump be himself and knowing he was not a person you wanted to emulate. It was very simple for me. But I also saw people in my own church accepting a person that was contradictory to our values very easily for, I think, one plain reason: to eliminate Roe v. Wade. And that had always been a bit of a struggle when I was a teenager, because I'm not an expert on the law. I had never had a girlfriend, so I had never had to contemplate what it would be like to have someone be pregnant. I watched people in my church go through difficult pregnancies and be told it would probably be better for your health to eliminate your pregnancy because your health is at risk.
Right. And
they moved forward with that pregnancy despite that fact and looked at it as a miracle. And I think there are cases where, yes, it is, quote, a miracle, but I think it's just somewhat of a chance as well. There are plenty of cases. If you take everyone, you're going to find cases where that didn't work out well.
Yeah, I mean,
and we pray and say that it was meant to be.
Here's an issue that I have with the idea of miracles or an outcome being determined by faith is logically, right? Say someone has cancer. What is a justification for one person surviving it versus one person not surviving it? And it's not a faith versus no faith thing, because what if they're both people of faith? You know, what if they both prayed to be rid of the cancer? Like, what makes one believer's belief stronger than another believer's belief?
Right.
What makes God listen to one person versus another person? There's no logical explanation for that.
Exactly. There's two things that happened in college for me. This is well before I left the church, that are roots of my belief system. And one of them was, we read a book, Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? And that goes along that point where, well, my child is fine and lived to adulthood, but my friends just didn't. There was SIDS or SIDS.
Right.
Why did that happen to them? Well, it was meant to be. I think that sort of thing can be arbitrary, and there's a whole chapter devoted to what all of that sort of thing means in this Evangelicals, and how to understand maybe, okay, this happened to me but not to them, this happened and it was good or bad, you know. And I also saw the film The Last Temptation of Christ by Martin Scorsese, which I think I have mentioned this to you before. I watched it and knew that Scorsese had grown up Catholic and had grown up wishing to possibly be a priest and turn towards film. I don't know exactly how that happened, but you can see a lot of Catholic imagery in his films and a lot of Catholic guilt come up in characters in his films, for sure. And I think this is his way of understanding his own faith, that Jesus was a man as well. And Willem Dafoe's portrayal of him in that, at least as I take it, is of someone that's being told he's Jesus Christ. We, thousands of years later, know what that means in hindsight. But imagine being a child and being told you're the Messiah the whole time. That's insane.
Yeah, that's some crazy shit.
So you grow up doing the best you can so that the people around you aren't disappointed. And that's, I think, how Willem Dafoe portrays it. And that's how I think faith is. My definition of faith is that you should be questioning everything all the time to make sure your faith is intact. Because how do I know I'm here in this room right now? Because I can see you and every other obvious reason.
Right.
But for the same thing that it becomes a spiritual faith, I think even the character Willem is portraying is supposed to have his own faith that he is Jesus, because if he dies and finds out he isn't, what did any of it mean?
Right.
And so when I would go to church and they'd say the same sermons over and over again, that's fine, but I think there's something to be said about traveling and hearing other people's experiences, whether they're in Christianity, whether they're in your own denomination of Christianity or not. I've had friends who are Muslim, I've had friends who are Jewish, I've had friends who are agnostic, and we all have different viewpoints that can reach to the same point, or not, and you just accept each other.
Right. I mean,
I think that's the point of
the whole thing is
faith.
that multiple truths exist.
Yes. And so that's the conclusion I was coming to through both that book and that movie. And then as the years rolled on under the Trump presidency and our church shut down, I helped our pastor continue our sermons. And we found our way through Facebook to be able to present a sermon. You don't need to keep it there, but it was there live.
Right.
It's legally allowed. We couldn't play music or something, and he could say a sermon and just say, let's remember someone who is sick with COVID.
So that was a pandemic thing.
And even before this all happened, I and my parents, even before my mother passed away, we kept noticing after the North Carolina bathroom bill was passed to define that there are two genders, which, if I sidebar for a second, would have been easily eliminated if we just always had unisex bathrooms.
Indeed.
But I actually went through the history of this a little bit. We used to have, at least in New York City, public bathrooms in train stations.
Yes.
And they started to separate them mostly for safety, which then becomes the root excuse for complaining about genderless bathrooms.
Right.
I think ironically. We're complaining about safety, and it would actually be safer if they were all unisex.
Right.
And one stall at a time.
Funny, I was looking on IG earlier today, and someone was complaining about there being gender-neutral bathrooms. And this person was like, I'm an ex-flight attendant. And guess what? Every bathroom on an airplane is gender-neutral.
Yeah.
It's so silly. So the video part of like the getting things set up on Facebook was a COVID. That was a COVID thing.
So I took a sidebar for that, but only because I wanted to talk about how ridiculous that is. Because we kept seeing, and I'm going to call out my pastor here, he would find a way to insinuate that bathroom bill into every sermon. It didn't happen a lot right then, but by 2019, he was definitely saying it every week. Even if it had nothing to do with genders or same-sex marriage or anything else, because then gender laws would lead to same-sex marriage as well.
Right.
He has a family member who's gay, and he uses that as an excuse to come or find happy medium. I don't know exactly how he would put it, so I don't want to put words into his mouth per se, but maybe find an excuse as to being able to have his side of things. I don't want to say it wrong, but he's still saying things in his sermons that are detrimental to people,
right,
to society, I think. And I couldn't condone myself being the arbiter of these videos, the one that would start the videos and then he'd say these things and go out into the world. And I said, well, if I'm mad about me being the one to release these things in the videos, I have to be mad at American evangelicalism. My pastor isn't doing the right thing, and so are so many other churches. I think my pastor is better than some of those other people because he will find a way to get to the heart of things with those other people, but I still think there are things he is ignorant about. And there are people that are much more ignorant and will use their platform to be heard across the country.
Right.
And so I think that's what Sarah McCammon is getting at. We would see this on a national level, especially with Trump, who at the very least, in my opinion, has never even thought about the Bible. But we as a Southern Baptist convention looked at that and thought a way to get rid of Roe v. Wade, a way to get our values into government. I think people in the church were just ignoring separation of church and state. And they wholeheartedly believe that there is a right to a Christian nation. even if it wasn't built that way. And so in my journey since then, and I talk to people my age, older, my father's come along with me, and we found that everyone feels more at peace with knowing this. Not that we're right. The other point of having faith is to not always think you're right.
Sure.
I may be completely wrong saying all of this. And that's the point of Willem Dafoe dying at the end of Last Temptation of Christ and finding out he's not Christ, or he is. Like, same for us. If I think I'm right about them all being wrong, then I'm just as wrong as them, in a way, is what I'm trying to say. Be confident, but not be looking down at people yourself, because you were in that place at one point as well. I don't think of myself as a former Christian. I still think of myself as a Christian, and in fact, after reading this book, I don't know if this term has been coined, but I think of myself as a nomadic Christian, because I've gone around to other churches in other places just to see how they're doing things. A lot of them are the same, but I think we can learn from individuals as much as groups.
100%.
So if I were to go to a temple or anywhere, a mosque, it's just the same.
Yeah.
So I think calling myself a nomadic Christian is something that could be something people of our age will prefer.
Like, your belief system and your value system isn't based on where you practice.
Right.
It's based on who you are. So you don't need to go to church at all to be Christian. It's not like you go into this little box and you're Christian for 2 hours a day and then you come out and you're, like, that doesn't validate you.
The thing I see about that is that I think it is a good place to reinforce your faith if that's what you want.
Sure.
I think you're right as
I'm
well.
not anti-church.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I had latched onto the idea of being in the same place I'd grown up with and thinking about maybe going out to California when I'd come home, visit the church I'd grown up in. But because I stayed there an extra 15 years, it didn't become stale. It became something that I had realized was blinding me, that I liked the history of my building more than I liked my faith. And so to get back to my faith, I had to leave my favorite place. So that's what happened.
It's really interesting. I'm thinking back to another conversation that I had on this podcast with this guy, Chad Pearson, who I initially met when he was working for a gospel label. And he identified as a Christian and went through a very similar thing to you around the same time, only it wasn't, I don't think it was specifically based on around COVID or based around queer politics. It was based around the George Floyd related uprising. And, he's a white guy with a black child. And I don't know that it caused a crisis of faith per se, and I certainly don't want to put words in his mouth, but it caused a crisis with the specific church that he was attending and was a part of. And I mean, he pretty much said he doesn't call himself a Christian anymore, but it feels like over the last 8 or so years, a lot of people have really had this crisis of faith. And maybe I'm using the wrong terminology. It doesn't feel like it's a crisis of faith because it's still...
Sarah McCammon used that as well.
Okay.
It's just a way to say it. It's,
right.
I also brought up this book by Sarah McCammon because I think it's beneficial to see for someone that might not know what's going on in the church, for people our age that want to still be Christian and be empathetic, as well as, I don't know how many Christians listen to your podcast, but
I mean, I'm
maybe
sure
they're
some
looking
do.
for some answers,
Yeah.
and this can help them lead them to whatever they need.
Right.
So this book, it's a culmination of her own journey over the past 8 to 10 years
Right.
as well.
Was there a moment when, like, I don't know how leaving a church goes. Did you have to speak to somebody, or did you just stop going to services?
Well, that's the thing. I was helping get the program up.
Okay.
So I started with, I don't think I can advertise this anymore. I can't get this on Facebook anymore. I don't know what that means. In the same way that I did with my job, I don't know how long I'll be here anymore.
Sure.
But I can't be the promoter anymore of these Facebook sermons. And I talked with my pastor. We had dinner a couple of times, and we've had it over the years. He does that with all the members of the church, just to check in individually so you're not just a face in the crowd.
Sure.
I think that's a good thing that most churches should implement.
Sure.
Because then there's the individual and the whole, and everything can go in tandem.
Right.
But we had some very good conversations about what all of this means and what was hurting me and my friends and what is hurting the church as well. And I said I'd be on this journey and I'd check in with him to tell him how it's going. And I've seen him a couple times over the past few years. This was 2021 when I officially left.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still a member on the roster because they keep you on until you find a new church.
Right.
But I don't know that I'll ever not be a member of that church then, because I'm not officially going to join another church. I don't think. I knew that I probably wouldn't find a church that met my needs, per se. And that's not what you should be doing either. If you have faith, then you navigate your faith or transform your own faith into what you think is best. Like I was saying, we don't know better than anyone else. I think it's just finding a thread to make everyone's lives better. Because what the Christian church, at least I think, should be, is a welcoming, accepting place that is open for anyone to find shelter or solace or just a chance to sleep,
And
a chance to read.
That's what, in theory, it should have always been. I mean, look, I'm not
And it
a
has been
biblical
at
scholar,
times, but
right. My understanding of any religion is that all are welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And I think specifically with the Christian church in America, it has definitely become the opposite of everyone is welcome.
And I know from other places that I've read or friends that I've heard from that there are people that wish their church wasn't lumped in with this. They are doing their best to find a way to be as welcoming and as understanding and empathetic and not use verses to find hate.
Right. Right.
And a lot of those places are with people of color. Like, just the statistics in this book and other articles I've read have pointed out that next churches are on the rise just because they've found faith to be more empathetic than what is on the public stage, which is often just white Baptist evangelicals. And as I was leaving, I was also helping with a church in Plainfield, right above where I grew up, that was led by a black man. And he was having trouble getting attendance, but that's more of the town than anything else. Mm-hmm. But I found that more invigorating than my church had been in a few years. And it was very diverse. My church growing up has always been diverse until about now. Didn't come back after COVID started, and there's very few people of color there now. But it had always been, and I think there's something to be said about the diversity of traditions within a church as well. I know I went to school in Pennsylvania, I mentioned. It was a Catholic college. So I learned a lot about Catholicism when I went there. My hometown is very Catholic, so there were a lot of Catholic kids in school. So this has always sort of been a part of me about learning a little bit from everybody. But I think the Catholics are very stuck in tradition and cannot break from those things. At the funeral that I just went to for this 96-year-old man, all the Catholics in the room stated their vows, the Lord's Prayer, and it sounds like a cult.
It does sound like a cult. I mean, yeah, I got my own thoughts.
Sure, you can know it by heart, like your Boy Scout badge or whatever, or pledge. But
I think in a lot of cases there is a thin line between organized religion and cults.
Right.
It's worship of a single person or worship of a single group of people. It is oftentimes blind worship. And anything that causes you to lose... Look, I am team member number 1 on the community team. I'm all about people coming together for a greater good purpose. But the moment you start to lose your ability to be an individual with critical thought, you're in a cult.
Right.
That's the long and the short of it.
And yeah, I know the Lord's Prayer. I think that aspect of it is knowing that you don't have to say it.
Right.
I've just picked it up from all the Catholic friends and my Catholic school because I started out going to the chorale there, and it was easy to memorize.
Yeah.
But I don't think you have to say it. I look at it as a sign of respect for the priest. And if you look at it that way, I think it's a better way to feel about it. You're not just saying it because you have to. We would often take the Lord's, I'm blanking on the word, but it's you take the bread and the wine. Communion, thank you. You would take the communion, and we do that once a month at our church. And I was talking with my godparents recently. I have godparents, even though we're not Catholic. So that's another aspect of it.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we picked up a tradition we don't necessarily need to have. Anyway, their church does it the first Sunday of every month. Ours did it the second. Whatever. Doesn't matter necessarily. And I looked at that and said, it's a sign of respect for your church to take that communion. It's an aspect of your faith. If you feel that time, you don't want to take it. Or when I was young, you were taught if you had sinned and hadn't prayed it away, this is paraphrasing as well, it might not be best to take the communion.
Sure, yeah.
They say that
I remember that
very much in communion at Catholic churches. But I definitely knew I had sinned, and I would say, okay, you know what's up, God. I'm taking this blood and cracker right now. I mean, what's going to make a difference if I prayed away this second or in 10 minutes?
The blood and the body of Christ.
In my mind, and this is just an aspect of my own faith, I always think if we have original sin, this is a way to explain away infant deaths as well. If this is all real, if God forgives all sin, then he already knows your last sin as well as your first. Because then if those babies had sinned somehow, then he would know it. And he would know if I was a 96-year-old and forgot to pray away my last thought of a naked woman or something, then I'm screwed because of that last sin.
Right.
Like, that's why we have last rites or
Right.
whatnot.
Right.
But often those people are in a coma.
Right.
So,
Right.
I started thinking about that.
Yeah,
and was okay.
It flies against so much logic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my faith is that God knows all sin already. So if you ask for forgiveness once to cover anything you forget, sure, that sounds great, doesn't it?
I mean, it makes it easy.
It
right?
makes it easy for me.
Right.
And that's what you have to watch out for, not being proud of being easy. But it is a thought I've had, so I don't want to hold it back either. I think other people should be aware of that.
I don't know. I just feel like if there is a God, if there are gods, if there is... Which I'm suspending belief for that already.
Yeah.
The key to all of it should just be like, be a good fucking person.
Right.
Be a good human, treat people with respect, treat people with dignity, be honest, be authentic. Obviously, there's not just one way to be a good person, and the idea of what a good person even is something that's very non-binary.
Mm-hmm.
But it should be as simple as that. Be a good person, treat other people with respect, treat yourself with respect. Period.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree with that, because that's often what I had heard from people once I was telling them, oh, I left my church, and I found that I felt more full of love from God than I had the last 3 years. They were like, me too. And I think that isn't necessarily what I'm going to say to everybody, but if that's what they say and they feel good about their faith, that sounds great to me.
And I also think that part of loving God is yourself practicing God-like qualities.
Yes. Right.
So
And that's what we were taught as a child in my church.
Right.
And sort of slipped away from that. And I don't think that was any one person. I think that was the church as a whole.
Yeah.
I think the church of the 90s, at least when I was learning, was decent enough, but never took that next step or fell back a step through the desire to come back to a church and state that wasn't separated.
Right.
I had a quote here from the book that I think sums up her thoughts as well as what I've been thinking this whole time.
As long as I don't have to pay anybody money for this.
Yeah. It's Sarah McCammon's grandfather had been interviewed by her for a class paper. So that's the citation this quote comes from. He said to her, I would rather not subscribe to anything in which I cannot have a deep and abiding faith. To do so is a betrayal of one's own integrity. I just don't feel that I have to accept a structured dogma. To live a full life, I am quite willing to admit and live with the fact that I do not know all the answers, rather than have the blanks filled in arbitrarily by someone else who doesn't know either. And that's what I come to. This pastor that I left the church during was not our first pastor. And that's the way I sort of see it. I learned from Pastor Mike Seaman when I was a child, all of these initial values. And the pastor we have now isn't the same person.
Sure.
But they have similar values, but what can I gain from both? And what are they both wrong about? And I don't want to put either of them on a pedestal for my faith. And there were a couple of people in between them, or as youth pastors that we had when our church was much fuller. And I've gone to other churches that said different things and made me think about aspects of life. I actually think I learned more from my Sunday school teacher than any of those people. And then I've learned from friends and family about what it's like to be another person. I think that's what it is. I think we're all just trying to learn about each other and not hurt each other as well.
I think the goal is for us to learn about each other and expose yourself to different ways of being. I think the fact that we've lived such different lives enriches the other person.
Yeah. Because when I think about you, I think about what you've told me about your life. And it's obviously different than mine in a multitude of ways. But that makes me think about other people that are like you that have done those things. And then I wonder if you think about people like me. It's a way to connect.
Right. And just grow your empathy button.
Yeah.
Understand that, again, we didn't all fall off the same assembly line.
Right.
We are the sum result of our experiences in life, and that ties into where we grew up, how we grew up, who we grew up with, exactly. All of that's things we were exposed to as children, and then it flies into now, right? Who do we interact with now? What is our lifestyle now? It flies into all this stuff. And, we're all different. And I think appreciating those differences and understanding those differences and loving those differences. Like, me and you come from two different places, but we're here living together. So what would it benefit me to be like, oh, I hate this about you, I disagree with this about you? How is it for me to say that a way that you're living is not?
Right.
I'm not the arbiter of how anybody should live. Nobody on this earth is the deciding factor on how anyone should live, because, again, we all came into this earth with different brains.
Right.
And those brains were further made different by the experiences that each of us has had.
Yeah.
So I think we really just collectively need to get to a place of understanding and empathy. I think those are the biggest roadblocks.
Right.
In terms of us becoming better humans.
Right. And that's the verse I finally remember the exact words. It's just love thy neighbor.
Right.
Is the easiest thing to remember.
Right.
That you should take from the Bible. It shouldn't be that difficult to remember that when you're about to be an asshole to someone because they love the same gender. It's not that hard. Or any of these other things that American evangelicals seem to have an issue with. It is funny. I was also going to bring up to you, coming to visit, that I finished a book that you gave me as a gift when we first met.
Oh, God.
I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I'm already like, what?
It's been a few years.
Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
I got that book. You know who gave me that book? Stuart.
Yeah?
Remember my friend Stuart?
Oh, yeah.
Stuart gave me that book.
He's a life coach now?
He is a life coach now. I mean, I haven't spoken to him in 5 years.
See, this is what I'm talking about. A friend that I am friends with on Facebook or Instagram or something, I see what his whole life is about. I'll never talk to him again.
Right.
And if he gave you that book and then you gave me that book, then that led to me reading it.
That's
which is very funny.
I mean, you're not reading like light. What did you get out of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck?
Well, it was similar values to it. Ironically, you gave this to me in, I think, 2017. I definitely remember it was before 19 because my mother saw me open it for Christmas. And not that they're prudes or anything, but they're like, oh, what did Mike get you? And it's open up, and the first thing you see is fuck.
Right.
I don't know about that Mike guy. But I think it was just like, oh, I didn't expect that kind of thing. So it's very funny to think about. But I put off reading it because I didn't necessarily think I'd want to read right then. And I had just started going to therapy at that point. So maybe that's why you thought it would be a good idea. It's a pseudo self-help book.
Yeah.
And it sort of covers the stages of grief in a unique way. But it's trying to get rid of aphorisms, which I love. I hate when aphorisms are all anyone knows how to say.
Right.
And interestingly, I had come to my own conclusions, some of the things he had come to as well, that I could have used before that, but naturally came to me as well, which is, it's funny. But I think the point of it is, in the moment when you're anxious or angry, let that continue. I think maybe that's what you were looking for to guide me.
I don't. It's been a long time since I've read the book, but something that I've really tried to grasp in therapy is the moment doesn't have to define every single thing that happens
the next
after
10
the moment.
years
Right.
or the next hour.
Right.
Yeah, I think the best part of the book is that in order to not cause other people around you to suffer as well for the thing that is bothering you, you don't hold it inside and let it fester. You find within yourself a way to get over it quickly. It's not even quickly. It's just
not about getting over it.
It's all about choices.
Right. It's about
the choices we make, whether good or bad,
right.
will have happened already now.
It's about addressing what the issue is and figuring out what it means to you.
Acknowledging that it hurt.
Right. And then, doing what you have to do with it.
Right.
And the key there is just not letting it fester, because we're seeing now what the result is of people who have all of this unresolved, whatever, depression, trauma. It doesn't leave you. If it's unresolved, you stay with it. And if it might come out 10 months later, it might come out 10 years later, it might come out 30 years later. It's going to come out, and the longer you wait to deal with it, or the longer you expect it to be dealt with, the worse it's going to come out. And that's why I think there's so much value in therapy. There's so much value in talking to other people. There's so much value in acknowledging that, hey, I may have been through something and I need to come to terms with this. And the stoicism, the archetype of like the strong silent person, like that is bullshit, because we've all been through stuff that we have to process, and if we don't process it, that shit is going to process you.
Right.
So,
and I didn't intend to read that leading up to us recording, but
right.
It just sort of happened.
God, I gave you that book.
I thought it was appropriate because we were going to maybe talk about this other book, the Sarah McCammon one.
Right.
And they sort of go hand in hand. I mean, they're both sort of like self-help books, just one's for a specific group. It's just funny because I think we can take all of these moments and learn from them, and that's what I think I hadn't really been doing. I think part of your podcast is to find the toxic masculine aspects of ourselves. I don't know anymore because I haven't caught up, obviously. But it's maybe what was toxic about me was me holding things in. And it helps to address these issues. It helps to acknowledge them and talk about them. And even if you think you're being open with other people, it doesn't hurt to continue in different ways, like going to therapy or reading a book, and it gives you a different viewpoint. This isn't the final viewpoint I'm going to have. I'm not going to be like, well, the author of Subtle Art is the only one that gets it finally.
Right.
No, he's one of many self-help books I've read.
Right. And you bring up a good point about the name of this podcast. I don't know that we're ever fully detoxed.
Right. That's also my point.
Yeah. We all have shit, and we're all dealing with tons of shit, and if you deal with some shit, that means you still have some shit that you, at some point, are probably going to have to deal with.
Right. That's one thing he was saying in the book.
So the point isn't to make us untoxic, it's to make us less toxic.
Yeah, he said those words, but he also reiterated it later, like, if I have an issue, that issue has happened, I just want to prevent that issue from hurting me in the future.
Right.
That issue still could come up again. I had been through a bad breakup and relationship for the previous 2 years when I first met you. And I thought you may have given it to me because I kept complaining to everybody about it.
You didn't complain to me that much about it.
I'm sure I complained to you.
I'm not saying you didn't complain to me at all. I mean, I've had people that have gone through breakups and have complained more.
Okay.
And it's not also not to say that you're wrong for complaining the amount that you did, but eventually you came to terms with that situation and you found another situation, and I hope you're happier now.
I think so.
Yeah.
That's the thing I think I learned from this book. It isn't just relationships, it's how you react to them. Right?
It's how you react to them, it's what you bring into the relationship, it's what you take out of the relationship, it's all of this stuff.
Yeah. I don't regret complaining about how I felt for the 3 years after I was hurt. But to let that take over your life and never do anything about it, I had to admit to myself that there was something wrong.
Yeah.
And am I still hurt? Absolutely. But I can live with it rather than make it my entire personality.
Don't make it, yeah. I mean, you can write an album about a breakup. Don't make your career about the breakup.
Right.
Got to give a big shout out to Tristan for taking the time to be on this podcast. We have been talking about this for ages, and I am really, really glad that we were finally able to make this happen. If you would like to know more about Tristan, you can follow him on, I guess I should say Instagram, although he doesn't really appear to use it much. And his Instagram is Interjected, INTRJECTED, no special characters. And you can find his podcast, and I guess I should have mentioned that at the top, or I've mentioned it at some point during our conversation, that he hosts a podcast, co-hosts, called Interjections, which is about film. He is a huge film buff, excuse me. And you can find the Interjections podcast probably the same place you find the Detoxicity podcast. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you for listening to Detoxicity. I hope you found this particular episode interesting. And if you are new, I hope you go back and listen to all of the older episodes. Once again, my name is Mike Joseph. I am the host and producer of this show. And there are a lot of things that you can do to continue to support our mission, continue to support this podcast. Follow me on social media. I am on Instagram, Twitter, and I'm on TikTok as DetoxPod Guy. You can also send me an email if you'd like. I'm at detoxpod@gmail.com. I am always on the hunt for people with interesting, inspirational, and powerful stories. So if you know somebody who fits that bill, or if you yourself fit that bill, please don't hesitate to drop me a line via email or via social media. Please make sure you subscribe on your podcast platform that you're listening to this on. Rate, comment, help a brother out, help us move up in the rankings. Follow me on social media. Like I said, follow our Patreon, or subscribe to my Patreon, actually. Patreon.com/detoxicitypod. You get access to exclusive episodes. You get episodes a little earlier than the general public. You get a cool-ass sticker, lots of stuff. Once again, patreon.com/detoxicitypod. Quick shout out to Calvin Williams for providing the music and doing his magic on the logo, which was originally designed by Jacob Block. I thank you all for listening. I wish you all the best. Please take care of each other. Till next time, peace.